So nobody really comes to Indian academia, Indian higher education, thinking that, that this is a space for for sort of academic freedom. Far from it.
One would think, and many have come out talking about how the power and privilege that comes with Ashoka being privately funded, backed by these well-off sort of philanthropic individuals. One would think that that would have sort of insulated the university more than anything else from external influence or political pressures. How does that play out? Because on one hand, you're talking about deemed universities or completely centrally funded universities, professors being sort of restricted at their ankles in some ways. And now we're seeing something like that playing out at a privately funded, completely autonomous university. Do you see any sort of correlation with the setup, or is it something to do with the larger power structure with dealing with education and research in India?
Depending on what type of institution there is, the autonomy and the freedom is different. So I would suggest that it's not very useful to reduce this debate into public versus private, because then it would be too simple. Obviously, public universities, have a tradition of, people speaking out against a number of issues. It's also because they have a number of mechanisms, like teachers' union, for instance, or a number of procedures that have set in the universities that give you a protection, that give you a sense where if you speak up, if you state certain things, you're not necessarily likely to face a quick backlash in terms of severe action and so on and so forth. So that tradition is there in public universities, but not in all public universities, right? Well, I don't think just because you have a philanthropic individuals setting up the university doesn't really guarantee that there will be freedom of expression or academic freedom or autonomy or respect. If anything, it's the other way around, because I think in order to understand and respect freedom of expression, academic freedom, again, you need to understand what makes a university. And I think what happens in public universities is that public universities are open, to students from disadvantaged backgrounds, simply because they don't charge enormous amount of tuition fees, right? So as a result, a number of students from really diverse backgrounds come to public universities, and they make the university. They actually talk different ways, they bring different experiences, and that does change the structure of the university, that does change a culture of the university. So in absence of that, perhaps that also plays a role in why a number of private initiatives set up with good intent, perhaps set up as philanthropic, set up on business model, set up as a corporate model, really don't respect intellectual autonomy and academic freedom. And I think I'm reminded of Bill Reading's text called "The University in Ruins," and that actually is a fantastic text that says that to understand contemporary university is to sort of dwell in ruins. So that experience is an experience of interruption, experience of ruins, and experience of contradictions, and that is what embodies a contemporary university. And I think what is really true also is the fact that contemporary universities are exhibiting what is called bureaucratic corporation style of working. So they're corporate in the sense they talk about efficiency, they talk about salary differences, and they talk about getting the best talent, and so on and so forth. They are open to experimentation and things like that. But at the same time, their style of working is extremely bureaucratic. So it's stifling. It's heavily regimented, and these two unlikely sort of methods of bureaucracy and corporate style have come together in functioning of contemporary universities. And I think that is some way to explain what's going on.
Now that the proverbial dust seems to have settled on Professor Bhanu Mehta's resignation from Ashoka, what impact do you see personally as a professor and a researcher? What impact do you see it having on the academic community in India and potential aspirants who are looking to enter the community?
So the struggle for academic freedom is, I think, much wider than what has happened here at Ashoka. And it's been ongoing, I think, for decades, and really is always also part of, especially of the post-independence fabric of every nation state, right?
Right.
For every colonized nation state. All post-independence, formerly colonized countries have to build their, build really in some sense the nation, right? Build their ideas of what it looks like and how the nation functions. Of course, the narratives of how to do that are what are sought after, right? The sentiment around it is what is often captured in a hollow way by demagogues who, either for electoral reasons or generally for reasons of political power. So does one want to be a country where academic freedom is protected? I think that is the question. And I think really the person who thought about this the most in constructing the nation and building the constitution and so on was Baba Sahib Ambedkar. And Dr. Ambedkar faced also this particular question that many nation-building exercises have not engaged with, which is the question of how to protect minorities from hate speech. And simultaneously, he also was under a lot of pressure from several other groups, including Hindu groups, around the shaping of the constitution. So there are two components, I think, to freedom of speech. One is the question of how the country's laws and constitution deal with free speech. For example, the US is often lauded as a place where academic freedom can be upheld because of the fundamental protection of freedom of speech. It's not as if it's a simplistic answer to all of the problems that we face, because of course then that creates an environment in which hate speech is also in some sense protected by those same rights. And universities have also, in the context of the US, grappled both with hate speech and grappled with the opposite, which is the removal of several academics who have said things which are problematic, at least from my personal political understanding, but from the dominant political understanding of the time. So, for example, a lot of academics from Palestine, or who have raised an understanding of the situation in Palestine from a Palestinian perspective, whether in fact they're Palestinian themselves or not, have all faced academic consequences. Harvard as well, we saw several examples, and in fact there's an ongoing example right now with Cornel West and the ways in which Harvard is treating him. So I think that that academic freedom therefore always has two components. There's a component inside the university and a component outside the university. And we have to, as a nation, think about how we want to deal with this question of free speech and hate speech in terms of our country's laws. And within academic circles, we have to think about how it is that we want to approach the question of free speech, and we have to really tackle that issue head on.
Is there something that sets aside the incident that we've seen with Professor Mehta from other UAPA cases of, let's say, a Gautam Navlaka, a Prashant Kanodia, or even a Disha Ravi that happened more recently? Is there something more innate to targeting academics at functioning universities, and from your experience?
No, I really think that what happens in university spaces is just a small part, and really often a much more dialed down version of the ways in which academic thought is curtailed outside the university. And I think a very large number of the people who've been arrested under UAPA in the last several years have had these critiques. Now, academia thinks that something is academic when it's produced in a university and when it's written in some publication which a small fraction of people in the world will read. But I don't think that's the case. The people who've been arrested under UAPA have, many of these people have been writing, speaking, writing pamphlets instead of writing journal articles, writing songs, singing, performing. All of these are, to my mind, academic. This is all academic work. They've been writing poems. They've been speaking in public platforms. They've been holding public meetings. All of these are academic exercises. They're not solely academic, but they're also academic. And I think that in some ways, many of the criticisms of power structures will emerge from outside academia and not from inside, because of the ways in which people inside academic structures are compromised by just our presence in such structures. And so it's important to recognize really that that academic freedom is under threat with every such arrest.
What is the rallying cry amongst professors in universities like yourself in terms of how universities can afford protection for their own work? And has there been any sort of disillusionment with the ideals of academic freedom in India over the past few years?
Indian higher education has its own logic and its own interpretation of what counts as academic freedom, what counts as intellectual sort of manifestations of disagreement and dissent. So really for a long time, so it is not just last few years, but that has been the case for a long time. And I think researchers who have worked on higher educational systems, as objects of sociological study, as object of educational study, have pointed that out, that the liberal values of academic freedom and autonomy have completely different meanings within institutional contexts in India. So they often are translated as autonomy with lots and lots and lots of restrictions, right? So that is how it is understood. And so nobody really comes to Indian academia, Indian higher education, thinking that that this is a space for sort of academic freedom. Far from it. It is an extremely hierarchical space. It's a space that is patriarchal, that is upper caste, that is heteronormative. It's extremely conservative. It wants you to conform, and that is what gets rewarded. And over a period of time, then you can begin to exercise your autonomy. Then you get some kind of agency, some kind of freedom. And another thing, which is very true of Indian higher education, is that even those who study, inequality, or who study politics, etc., have sort of made their peace, I would say, that they would study or they would research inequality, or they would research marginalization outside of the confines of the university, right? So you would study agrarian crisis, you would study what is happening in Adivasi areas, you would study what is happening elsewhere, but you rarely do question what is happening in your own campus, in your own institution, which is extremely hierarchical, and very few people would kind of reflect on their own positions of power vis-a-vis students or RAs or interns and things like that. So we embody a lot of power as well. We exercise a lot of power in these institutions as well. And I think there hasn't been that much introspection and reflection about those. I'm not saying that there hasn't been any introspection about it, but definitely, it is inadequate. Given the amount of expansion of our colleges, universities, and the fact that there are first generation students coming in, there are a number of disciplines that are really new disciplines because what is happening outside, women's studies, gender studies. So these are kind of new, extremely interesting intellectual foray, but at the same time, institutions tend to be regimented, institutions tend to be conservative and hierarchical spaces.